Hi, everyone. I'm Lisette Gaudet. I'm the archivist at the Yarmouth County Museum and Archives. And today I'm excited to be talking about the world of Do and Other Stories with the book's author, Julian Mortimer Smith. Hi, Julian. How are you today?
Hello, I'm good. How are you?
I'm very good. I'm very good. So I had a chance to read your book over the weekend, and it is excellent. I
Thank you.
loved every story. It brings you, every story brings you a new emotion and brings you into a new world. So it's wonderful. What can
Thanks so much.
readers expect when they open up this book?
Well, it's a collection of 18 short stories, and they're all speculative fiction in one way or another. So that means science fiction or fantasy, or just stories that have sort of a hint of the unusual or sort of magical in them. And they kind of run the gamut from like some of them are straight up sci-fi about spaceships and aliens and intergalactic space truckers. There's at least one fairy tale in there about a troll and fairies in the woods who are making mischief. And a few of them are sort of more realistic stories that either have a sort of near future kind of speculation on the future of technology, or they have a slight sort of strange magic to them, I guess. So they're all speculative, but to different degrees. And most of them have been published before. Most of them were published in magazines before this book came out over the last like 10 years. And then there are 5 brand new ones that are published here for the first time.
Now, what inspires and influences your writing? And I believed you moved to Yarmouth. How many years have you been in Yarmouth?
So I moved here in 2010.
Okay, so you've been here quite some time. So has living in Yarmouth influenced your writing in any way?
Definitely, yeah. I was really realizing recently that I've lived in Yarmouth is actually the place I've lived longest of anywhere I've lived. So yeah, I'm come from away, but Yarmouth is my home by now. Yeah, Yarmouth definitely influenced the writing. A couple of the stories are sort of directly set in Yarmouth, or in sort of strange analogs to Yarmouth, I guess. So before I moved to Yarmouth, I thought that in order to be an artist or a musician or a writer, you should sort of move to a big city where the creative hotbeds like Montreal or London or New York. Yeah, so once I sort of started to like scratch beneath the surface, I realized that Yarmouth, of course, has a whole universe of culture and creativity and stories just kind of waiting to be discovered. And I think that's probably true of any town or any community, no matter how small. So it sort of changed my attitude towards creativity and like what you needed to do if you wanted to be a writer or an artist. And I think in some ways, sort of the creative culture of small towns is more, it's sort of stranger and more kind of idiosyncratic than big cities, because it's kind of grown up in isolation in a sense. Like in Yarmouth, if you're a filmmaker or a writer or a musician, you've got to sort of do everything yourself and sort of invent things from the ground up. So not having kind of a huge creative community where there are thousands of bands playing every night can sort of make the art scene more interesting and more welcoming as well, because of course I got opportunities when I moved to Yarmouth that I never would have had in a big city like Toronto, where writers are a dime a dozen, right? So more specifically, Yarmouth inspired some of the stories in the book pretty directly. Or the first story in the book is inspired by Shag Harbour, which is just up the coast from here, where there was a famous UFO crash in the 60s. And it wasn't something I'd ever heard of before. It wasn't, a particularly famous one, like, Area 51 or whatever, but it's one of the best documented in history. And there are tons of true believers out there who think that aliens really did visit Shag Harbour in Nova Scotia. So the first story in the book is kind of a riff on that story. It was inspired by that story. So yeah, Yarmouth has definitely influenced my writing and my attitude towards art and creativity.
That's wonderful. Yeah, definitely. There's a limit of the equipment and things like that, like you said. So it definitely makes people more, I think, inventive and resourceful on how they do things. But they get it done one way or another, which is great to see. So have you always been interested in stories that take place in the science fiction world?
Yeah, I mean, I grew up a nerdy kid who liked sci-fi and fantasy. I grew up in England, so I was very into Warhammer and tabletop miniature games as a kid, and I liked sort of pulpy sci-fi and fantasy stories. But my mum was also really interested in sci-fi and fantasy, and she introduced me to some of them sort of more literary science fiction, like Ursula Le Guin, and Mervyn Peake and writers like that, Stanislav Lem. So I kind of came at science fiction and fantasy from two angles, from a sort of like trashy pulpy angle and from a sort of more literary angle. And I still love both those elements of science fiction. And the writers I enjoy most tend to sort of combine the two, and they're sort of pulpy feel good stories about spaceships and trolls, but they also have a sort of literary bent to them, I guess, and that's what I sort of hope to try and achieve in my writing as well.
So one of my favorite stories reading this book was the story Professor Jennifer Magna Chichester's Time Machine. I really enjoyed that one. And it delved into the world of time travel in a very unique way, but it also showcased the all too often occurrence of downplaying women's accomplishments in history. And specifically in this story was the scientific community. Did you make a conscious decision to highlight this in the story?
So I think this is a good question. And I think, yeah, it definitely was a conscious decision, but it wasn't the sort of initial idea for the story. Was just the sort of central conceit of, someone invents a time machine, someone else steals the idea and goes back in time and invents it a bit earlier. So that idea came first. And then in writing the story, I was just like, okay, what's the best way to tell this story? And it's told as just a series of sort of expository vignettes going back further and further in time. But as soon as I started, clothing this idea in characters and plot and setting, it sort of became clear that, oh no, this story can do a little bit more than that. It can also, make a comment on a man stealing a woman's invention, which, as you say, has happened throughout scientific history, and people are sort of just beginning to tell the stories of some of those women now. The book and movie Hidden Figures is a good example of that. So yeah, the initial idea for the story wasn't about that. I didn't set out to write a story about a male scientist who steals a female scientist's invention, but I find that often happens during the process of writing a story. You end up sort of finding resonances with political issues or social issues, and then in sort of editing and writing a second draft, you can choose which of those you want to bring out and which of those you want to how you want to engage with those things. So it definitely was a conscious decision, but it wasn't there from the sort of first moments, I guess.
Very interesting. Now, another very interesting story that is in the book is the story Headshot. And it reminded me a lot of the show Black Mirror, where the use of technology dictates, in that show, it dictates really their every move. And in this story, it dictates the soldiers' moves and movements. So much of our life today, and especially in the last year and a half, has been dictated by technology. We've done so much virtually. What are your thoughts on how the virtual world, and especially social media, will continue to shape our lives?
I don't really know. I mean, I like to sort of play with ideas about how they're going to shape our lives, but I don't really I don't think of myself as a futurist. Some science fiction writers are also futurists, and they make predictions about what's going to happen in the future. And in fact, some science fiction stories have sort of directly influenced the development of technology. Or Google Earth is the idea from that was sort of based on a science fiction novel written in the early 90s. But I just don't really feel like I know enough about technology. I will say that so Headshot is a pretty sort of cynical story about the future of social media and war. But in general, I'm kind of an optimist when it comes to technology. Like of course I have concerns about how much control a few big tech companies have over our lives and over the way we interact and the way we even sort of experience the world. But I'm generally sort of optimistic, and I think that the internet and social media has allowed lots of kind of communities with really specific interests and of course marginalized communities to find each other and come together and like share those interests. So I think it's been really important for letting, especially in a small town, letting people who would otherwise not have a community find a community. I think that's really wonderful. So yeah, there are, I have worries about the future of social media and technology, but I'm also sort of generally hopeful and optimistic about it, and I think it's done some wonderful stuff.
Certainly, and it certainly helped us. I mean, right now being in our lockdown, I mean, we couldn't have had this interview this morning if not for the virtual world. So there are a lot of benefits to it, but like you said, there are concerns as well, as with anything. Now, the cover art, I'm showing it here, the cover art is just beautiful. And when I looked on the back cover and saw that it was made by local artist Cecil Day, I'm not surprised because she's an amazing artist. What made you choose this beautiful cover?
Yeah, so Cecil is incredible. I really love her work. She's part of the Yarmouth Art Society, and I'm part of the Yarmouth Writers Group, Right Away. Most years they do a pairing between where they pair up an artist and a writer, and then either the writer creates a piece responding to a work of art that the artist has made, or vice versa. And I was lucky enough to be paired with Cecil one year, and I wrote a very short piece that was actually a fragment from the first story in the book, just like a little 250 word excerpt, I think it was. And then she made this work of art based on that fragment of writing. So when my publisher got in touch with me and said, hey, what do you want to do for the cover? Here's they sent me a link to a stock image gallery and said, look through these images and see if anything catches your eye, and then our designers will, work with what you want. Or if you have something else in mind, let us know. So I immediately thought of Cecil's piece and sent them that, and they thought it was amazing. And I got in touch with Cecil, and she very kindly gave us permission to use it. And yeah, I couldn't be happier with the way the cover looks. It's I think it's beautiful, and yeah, so thanks to Cecil for that. Oh, and by coincidence, so the book was published by Indiana University Press in the States. And by coincidence, that was where Cecil did her undergrad degree.
Oh wow!
That was a nice little coincidence there.
A nice connection there for sure. Yeah. Now our last questions, we're gonna end with a little fun question. The world of science fiction allows a writer to reshape and recreate and reinvent history in a lot of fun ways, in a lot of thought-provoking ways. Now, Yarmouth has and continues to be influenced by the sea. So much of our history revolves around that, and it continues to impact our community today. Now, if you, as the writer, could reinvent Yarmouth's history to a world that seafaring had never existed, that it was not our center, what would you choose? What would you create?
So I've thought about this quite a lot, but not in any sort of practical or like economically viable way, because I'm a fantasist. And two of the stories in the book kind of deal with this question fairly directly. In the first one, the wreckage of alien spaceships begins to wash up on the beaches of Yarmouth, and the locals start to build things out of that wreckage. And in another one, someone discovers a subterranean city underneath Yarmouth, and that city is full of ghosts. So it becomes a destination. Yarmouth becomes a destination for ghost hunters and also for kind of tech entrepreneurs trying to monetize the ghosts. So, those are two ways we could, instead of being based around the sea, would be based around aliens and ghosts.
Okay.
Yeah, so if I was going to reimagine Yarmouth's history, I think I would imagine the culture and community of the town being based around some sort of strange local secret, because that's what I find really interesting about Yarmouth and about small towns, is that, as soon as you scratch beneath the surface, all this really interesting history turns up. But if I was going to write a science fiction story about Yarmouth, I might make an analogy between the ocean and the internet. The town slogan, "On the edge of everywhere," that would be a good slogan for like a tech company.
For sure.
Maybe Yarmouth would be like the landing spot for a undersea cable or something, and then a bunch of tech companies would move to town to be a little bit closer to where the information comes into North America or something like that. So I might make a sort of analogy between the wide open ocean and the wide open internet, and Yarmouth being the landing spot for both those things.
I especially like the secret one. I think that would be very intriguing to find out what the secret is. Maybe something revolving the runic stone or something like that.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much, Julian. We appreciate your time today talking about your wonderful book, The World of Do and Other Stories. We wish you a lot of success, and hopefully we'll be able to speak again when you write another book. I encourage everybody to go out and purchase this book. It is available at our gift shop at the museum. And again, thank you very much, Julian.
Thanks so much. I really appreciate the opportunity.